This happened toward the end of 2020, when time itself felt unreliable. COVID had flattened cities into quiet grids, and winter had arrived early and hard. In the mountains, the cold didn't merely linger, it settled in and claimed the place. Night temperatures dropped well below freezing, and even during the day the sun felt distant, like it was only visiting. I was living alone then, working remotely, restless in the way everyone was restless that year. A close friend of mine, Daniel, lived in Boulder, Colorado with his wife and 2 kids. His older brother, Mark, lived in Houston, Texas, and had flown up with his family to spend a few weeks together. It was meant to be a break, from the news, from fear, from screens. Mark had connections through a state agency, and through those connections they managed to reserve a government-owned lodge near Estes Park, not far from the edges of Rocky Mountain National Park. It wasn't a hotel, not really. More like a functional retreat used occasionally by state departments. Normally it wasn't available to civilians at all. They planned to stay for a week. They contacted me because I owned a large SUV, something solid, reliable, good for snow and mountain roads. They already had one big vehicle, but with families, kids, luggage, and supplies, 2 vehicles made sense. Daniel also knew I lived alone and figured I might appreciate the change of scenery. I agreed without much hesitation. We decided to leave around midnight, partly to avoid traffic, partly because there was nothing tying us to normal schedules anymore. In 2020, days bled into each other anyway. The convoy formed quietly. 2 vehicles, headlights cutting through the dark, the city lights thinning behind us. As we moved farther north and then west, the roads emptied. Gas stations were closed. Rest stops were dark. Snow gathered at the edges of the asphalt like something waiting patiently. We stopped a few times, coffee, restroom breaks, stretching stiff legs, but no one lingered. The cold discouraged conversation. Windows stayed rolled up. Breath fogged the glass. By the time we reached the dirt road leading off the main highway, it was close to 4 a.m. The paved road ended abruptly, as if the state had simply lost interest beyond that point. The dirt road cut straight into the forest. On one side, the land sloped downward into darkness. On the other, tall pine trees crowded in close, their branches heavy and still. There was no wind. The forest wasn't dense in the way eastern forests are. It was open but deep, trees spaced just far enough apart to see between them but not far enough to feel comfortable. Pine needles muffled sound. Even the engine seemed quieter. The air smelled sharp and clean, almost medicinal. Pine resin. Cold earth. Snow somewhere higher up. We followed the dirt road for several minutes until a low metal fence appeared, more symbolic than functional, and beyond it, the lodge. The property consisted of 2 main buildings, simple and rectangular, built for use, not beauty. No decorative lighting. No signage. Just structure. To the right as you entered, the kitchen, restrooms, and a large dining hall. To the left, 4 spacious bedrooms clearly meant to accommodate groups. Behind the bedrooms was a small gravel parking area. Behind the kitchen and dining hall stretched an open garden space with chairs arranged around a fire pit, a metal ring blackened from previous fires. The forest surrounded everything. Left, right, front, trees. Behind the lodge, the land rose steeply into a mountain slope, and near the top of that slope stood a tall fire watch tower, its silhouette barely visible against the early morning sky. Someone noticed it first, I don't remember who. "There's a guy up there," one of the women said casually, pointing. We all looked. There was unmistakably a figure standing in the tower, wrapped in something that looked like a blanket or a heavy coat, motionless, watching the forest or maybe just staring into the dark. No one thought much of it. A ranger maybe. A watchman. It made sense. At that point, nothing felt strange. The caretaker arrived shortly after sunrise. He was a local man in his late 40s or early 50s, calm, soft-spoken, and unusually warm for someone living that far out. He welcomed us without hurry, showed us the rooms, and brought tea without being asked. By late afternoon, the light had shifted. The forest darkened earlier than expected, shadows stretching long between the trees. It was the time between late afternoon and sunset, that quiet interval where everything seems to pause. That evening we planned a barbecue. We had prepared carefully. Meat had been bought in advance. Chicken, beef, ground meat, all packed in specialized reusable bags, not plastic. Everything had been placed in my SUV before departure, carefully arranged. When it came time to unload, we opened the back. The bags were gone. At first, no one reacted. People assumed a mistake, maybe moved to the other car, maybe left at home. We checked again. Then again. Both vehicles were unloaded completely. Nothing. No meat. No bags. No trace. Everyone denied touching them. No one had a reason to lie. The confusion turned slowly into unease. Not fear, just that hollow, irritating feeling of something being wrong in a way you can't immediately name. The barbecue was canceled. The caretaker noticed our frustration and insisted on handling dinner himself. He left and returned later with his family, women and men both, bringing cooked food, fruit, and warm bread. The generosity felt genuine, not performative. Because the women observed modesty customs, they ate inside the dining hall, seated on carpets. The men stayed outside, sitting on chairs near the fire pit. The flames crackled, throwing light into the trees, but beyond that ring of warmth, the forest swallowed everything. Night came down fast. The lodge lights glowed dimly. The fire watchtower disappeared into darkness. And that was when the screaming began. From inside the dining hall, sharp, sudden, unmistakable. Chairs scraped. People jumped to their feet. We rushed toward the sound, hearts already beating faster than reason demanded. Inside, one of the caretaker's relatives, a young woman, was screaming uncontrollably. Not crying. Screaming. Words spilled out of her mouth in a language and tone that didn't sound human in the usual way. Women surrounded her, reciting prayers, trying to calm her, pouring water on her face. She thrashed as if fighting something invisible. Eventually, they led her outside toward the caretaker's nearby home. Her screams carried through the trees long after she disappeared from sight. Later, quietly, the women told us something that made the room feel colder. That girl, they said, could not speak. She had been mute since birth. No one argued. No one laughed. No one tried to explain. We ate in silence. Outside, the forest listened. And somewhere above us, unseen in the dark, the tower stood empty, or not. Night in the mountains doesn't arrive gently. It shuts things down. The forest that felt open during the day becomes sealed, as if the trees have quietly stepped closer together. Sound behaves differently too. A footstep carries farther. A cough feels loud. Silence becomes a presence of its own. After the screaming stopped and the young woman was taken away, we tried, deliberately, to return to normal. Plates were cleared. Tea was poured again. People spoke in low, careful voices, the way you do when you don't want to wake something. The caretaker stayed with us longer than necessary. He sat near the fire pit, hands wrapped around a metal cup, staring into the flames. The fire snapped occasionally, sending sparks upward. Beyond the firelight, the forest was absolute black. Children were already half asleep, bundled in jackets, leaning against their parents. The cold worked its way through everything, clothes, chairs, bones. Eventually, the caretaker stood and excused himself, then paused as if reconsidering. He came back. "I need to tell you something," he said quietly. It wasn't the words. It was the way he said them. No drama. No tension building. Just a simple statement like telling someone rain was coming. He asked me, Daniel, and Mark to step a few feet away from the others. "What I'm about to say," he continued, "I'm not really allowed to say, but your guess. And you seem like reasonable people." We waited. "If, during the night," he said, choosing his words carefully, "you hear someone calling your name from outside, do not respond." None of us reacted. "Not yet. If you hear knocking on the door," he went on, "do not open it." Mark let out a small laugh. "Probably coyotes or something, right?" The caretaker didn't smile. "And if anyone needs to go to the restroom," he said, "don't go alone. Go in groups." That got our attention. I asked him why. He shook his head slightly. "I can't explain more than that." We tried to push him, asked about animals, strangers, trespassers. He didn't argue, didn't elaborate. Just repeated himself. "Ignore voices. Ignore knocking. Don't go alone." Then he thanked us for understanding, wished us a peaceful night, and left. We stood there for a moment, listening to the fire. Daniel finally said, "Well, that was unsettling." We agreed not to tell the others. There was no benefit in spreading anxiety, especially with kids present. We chalked it up, publicly at least, to local superstition mixed with caution. Inside, people prepared for bed. The sleeping arrangements were simple. Families took 3 of the bedrooms. The remaining room was shared by me and 4 teenage cousins. Boys between 17 and 23. They were energetic, bored, and entirely unimpressed by atmosphere. They played board games. laughed, whispered jokes. The lodge creaked occasionally as wood adjusted to the cold. I stayed awake longer than the others, not because I was afraid, but because sleep didn't feel appropriate yet. Something about the place resisted it. Outside there was no wind. Then very clearly we heard a woman's voice. It came from outside the building. She spoke a child's name. A familiar name. Daniel's youngest son. The boy stopped talking. Every one of us looked at the door. 2 seconds later, a man's voice followed. Lower, firmer, repeating the same name. No accent we could place. No emotion we could read. Just calling. No footsteps. No rustling. Just voices, exactly where a person would stand if they were outside the door. My heart rate spiked, not in panic but in a cold, alert way. The caretaker's warning replayed in my head, precise and unwanted. Ignore it. We didn't move. 10 seconds passed. Maybe less. Maybe more. Time does strange things when your body is deciding whether it's in danger. Then the voice came again, louder, sharper. At the same moment there was knocking. Not a casual knock. Not tentative. 3 heavy strikes, close together like someone hitting the door with the side of their hand. Behind us, from another room, a teenage girl screamed. Everything broke at once. Doors opened. People shouted. Lights flipped on. Someone grabbed a child. Someone else shouted a name. We rushed into the hallway, and within seconds the entire lodge was awake. No one was outside. No footprints in the snow. No movement in the trees. Nothing. The girl who screamed was shaking, incoherent. She said she'd heard someone whispering her name right beside her bed. We did what people always do in moments like that. We lied. We said it was a prank. Someone must have joked around. Maybe someone knocked as a joke. Maybe the wind. Maybe imagination. No one could explain who did it, but everyone accepted the explanation because the alternative was worse. To calm things down, all the women and children were moved into the large dining hall, sleeping together on mattresses and blankets. The men stayed in one of the bedrooms across the hall. No one slept. We stayed awake, talking quietly, playing games, telling deliberately boring stories. Every sound made someone look up. Every creak felt intentional. The forest stayed silent. Near dawn, exhaustion finally won. One by one, people drifted into shallow, restless sleep. When I woke, sunlight was already cutting through the windows. It was close to noon. For a few hours, the world behaved normally again. We decided to leave the lodge for the day and explore town, break the spell, get coffee, do tourist things. The plan worked, at least on the surface. We visited landmarks, took photos, walked through small shops, bought snacks we didn't eat. No one mentioned the night out loud, but it hung between us, unspoken. We returned to the lodge just before sunset. The caretaker's family was already there, preparing dinner. The smell of cooking filled the air. Laughter drifted from the kitchen. For a moment it felt safe again. The fire watchtower loomed above us, catching the last light of the day. That was when one of us said it. Let's go up there. We asked the caretaker about it casually, expecting a routine answer. Yesterday, Daniel said, we saw a man standing up there. The caretaker frowned. What man? The one in the tower. He shook his head. No one goes up there in winter. We insisted. Everyone had seen him. Even the women. The caretaker's expression didn't change. That tower was built after the fire in 2013. Forest department use only. Summer season. No one stays there now. He added something that stuck with me. And to get there, he said, you have to pass behind this lodge. I would have seen anyone. We exchanged glances. He wasn't defensive. He wasn't evasive. He was certain. We asked him to take us anyway. He agreed. The climb took nearly 20 minutes. The slope was steeper than it looked, the cold sharper as we rose. Halfway up, the call to prayer echoed faintly through the trees below. By the time we reached the tower, night had begun to settle again. And from up there, the forest looked endless. That's when we saw the lights. But that comes next. The fire watchtower was larger than it looked from below. From a distance, it had seemed like a simple platform, something functional, temporary. Up close, it felt more permanent, more deliberate. A square room sat at the top, enclosed on all sides with narrow windows cut into each wall. The metal ladder groaned softly as the caretaker climbed first, his movements slow and steady, as if he'd made the climb many times before. Inside the tower, the air was colder, sharper. The wind pressed gently against the walls, creating a low, uneven hum. From that height, the forest spread out in every direction, dark green shapes dissolving into shadow. The lodge lights glowed faintly below us, small and fragile. We removed our shoes and prayed Maghrib together. The caretaker led the prayer. His voice was calm, unhurried, grounded. For those few minutes, the unease receded, replaced by a familiar rhythm, standing, bowing, prostrating. Whatever this place was, prayer still fit inside it. It was during the final moments, while our heads were bowed, that I noticed a change in the light. At first, I thought it was my eyes adjusting. Then I realized it was coming from across the valley, on a ridge several hundred meters away. Small points of light. Not stationary. Moving. After prayer, we all turned toward the windows. There were 7 lights, spaced unevenly, drifting along the ridge line. They glowed with a dull orange hue, not the sharp white of flashlights, not the flicker of campfires. They moved smoothly, without bobbing, without the irregularity of human footsteps. Someone said, "Maybe hikers?" But even as the words left his mouth, the explanation felt thin. No trails ran along that ridge. No cabins. No reason for people to be up there at dusk in winter carrying torches. We watched in silence as the lights moved together, then slowly converged toward a single point. When they reached it, they didn't disappear one by one. They faded simultaneously, as if turned down rather than extinguished. The ridge was dark again. We turned to the caretaker. He didn't look surprised. "What are those?" Mark asked. The caretaker hesitated, then smiled, not amused, not nervous. Almost apologetic. "They're not people," he said. "And that's not fire." We waited. "That's another creation," he continued. "Different from us." No one laughed this time. "You see them often?" I asked. "Often enough," he replied. "Especially here." We pressed him. Asked questions we'd avoided before. About the voices. About the warnings. About the lodge itself. He spoke quietly, without embellishment. "This area is old," he said. "Before roads. Before towns. People pass through, but other things live here. Most of the time nothing happens. But sometimes, they notice visitors." "Why children?" Daniel asked. The caretaker shrugged. "They're easier to call." A beam of light suddenly swept across the trees below, wide, white, frantic. Flashlight signals from the lodge. Something was wrong. We didn't need to be told. We moved. The descent felt longer than the climb. Loose gravel shifted underfoot. Breath burned in our chests. As we got closer, we heard shouting, high-pitched, panicked. At the lodge, chaos waited. A child was locked inside one of the bathrooms. His mother stood outside the door, pounding on it, her face drained of color. Other women crowded behind her, crying, shouting the child's name. The door wouldn't open. The latch was engaged. Not the standard latch at hand height, but the upper bolt mounted well above where a small child could reach. Someone tried forcing it. It didn't budge. We had no choice. Using a heavy metal tool from the utility area, we broke the door open. The sound echoed through the building like a gunshot. The child was crouched inside, shaking violently, his face streaked with tears. He hadn't been hurt physically, but his body trembled as if it had been. "What happened?" we asked. "I didn't see anything," he said over and over. "I didn't see anything." His mother swore the door hadn't been locked when he went in. She'd been standing outside the entire time. She heard the latch slide into place from inside, distinct, deliberate. No one could explain it. That was the moment denial collapsed. Daniel's wife spoke first. "My son was called last night." Mark's wife followed. "Someone locked my child in a bathroom." The women demanded answers. So we told them everything. The caretaker's warning. The voices. The knocking. The tower. The lights. No one argued. No one mocked. The decision was immediate. "We're leaving," they said. The original plan had been to stay a full week. We had brought supplies, clothes, toys. But none of that mattered anymore. It was too dangerous to drive the mountain roads that late. A breakdown in the dark, in that cold, would be worse than staying another hour. We packed what we could, quickly and without organization, and drove into town. There was a small hotel near the market. Plain. Brightly lit. Ordinary. We checked in without discussion. That night, no one heard voices. No one knocked. In the morning, we left Estes Park. No one suggested returning. I thought about that trip often, not with fear but with a kind of reluctant respect. The events didn't demand belief. They didn't ask to be named or categorized. They simply happened. Some places are not empty even when they look that way. And sometimes the forest doesn't want company. Leaving didn't feel like escape. It felt more like withdrawal, like stepping carefully backward out of a room where a conversation had started without your consent. The hotel in town was ordinary in every possible way: fluorescent lights, patterned carpet, vending machines humming softly in the hallway. Normal sounds, human sounds. We welcomed them like old friends. That night, everyone slept. Deep, unbroken sleep. No dreams worth remembering. No voices. No sudden waking. Morning arrived cleanly, without incident, and that alone felt like confirmation that leaving had been the correct decision. We packed up early and drove out just after sunrise. As the town receded behind us, the forest thinned, then gave way to open road. Cell service returned. Radios picked up stations again. The world reasserted its usual rules. No one talked much during the drive. There was a shared understanding that whatever had happened up there did not benefit from casual discussion. We weren't suppressing fear. We were preserving clarity. Talking too much, too loosely, risked turning the experience into something smaller than it had been. By the time we reached the highway, the mood had shifted. Kids argued over snacks. Adults discussed lunch plans. Life resumed its usual pace, but something subtle had changed underneath it all. In the weeks that followed, we stayed in touch, but the trip rarely came up. When it did, it was mentioned indirectly: that mountain place, or the lodge. No one joked about it. No one exaggerated. We stuck to facts. A few days later, Daniel called me. He said his youngest son had been waking up at night. Not screaming. Not crying. Just sitting upright in bed, wide awake, insisting someone had been calling his name from far away. When asked who, he couldn't answer. When asked where, he'd gesture vaguely toward the window. It stopped after a week. Mark mentioned something similar with his child. Bathroom doors suddenly locking on their own at home. It happened twice. Never again. Coincidences, maybe. Months passed. Winter ended. Spring came. COVID loosened its grip. The world began pretending it had always been stable. I tried to forget the details that didn't fit neatly into explanations. I focused instead on the practical oddities: missing food, locked doors, voices without bodies. Each had a possible explanation if isolated. Together, they resisted assembly into anything comfortable. At one point, curiosity got the better of me. I looked up public records related to the area around that lodge: Forest Service notes, incident logs, anything archived. There was nothing dramatic. No disappearances. No crimes. No official reports of anything unusual. Just one line, buried in an old fire management document, referencing recurrent unexplained disturbances during off-season occupancy. No elaboration. No follow-up. It bothered me more than a detailed report would have. A year later, I found myself in Colorado again, passing within an hour of Estes Park. I considered detouring, just to see it in daylight, to reassure myself that the place was ordinary. I didn't. The thought of standing there again, knowing what I knew now, felt intrusive. Like visiting someone unannounced after they'd made it clear the conversation was over. That's when I realized something important. Nothing followed us home in the way people expect when they hear stories like this. No lingering shadows. No recurring nightmares. No obsession. The experience didn't behave like a haunting. It behaved like a boundary encounter. We had gone somewhere we were allowed to pass through, but not to linger. The warnings weren't threats. They were instructions. Ignore the voices. Don't open the door. Don't go alone. Those weren't meant to scare us. They were meant to keep things orderly. Looking back, the strangest detail isn't the voices or the lights or the locked door. It's the caretaker. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't defensive. He wasn't excited to tell stories. He treated everything as procedural knowledge, like fire safety rules or weather patterns. Something you respect, not something you challenge. Some places, especially old ones, don't belong exclusively to us. We build structures, mark boundaries, name towers and trails, but that doesn't erase what was already there, or what still is. We assume silence means emptiness. That assumption is convenient, and occasionally it's wrong. Stories like this usually end with a declaration, a conclusion, a label that makes the experience easier to store away: haunting, mass hysteria, folklore, coincidence. The mind prefers containers. If it can name a thing, it feels it can control it. This one never settled into a container. What remained wasn't fear. Fear burns fast and leaves ash. What stayed behind was something quieter, an adjustment. Like learning that a familiar road floods during certain seasons, and altering your route without resentment. In the months after the trip, I noticed myself becoming more attentive to boundaries, physical and otherwise. Doors closed gently instead of slammed. Windows checked twice. Not out of anxiety but out of respect. The same way you behave near deep water even if you know how to swim. Nothing supernatural followed me home. No dreams, no sounds, no sensations. If anything, life became more ordinary, not less. That's part of what made the memory durable. It wasn't reinforced by repetition. It existed on its own. Once, over a year later, Daniel and I talked about it openly for the first time. Not to relive it, but to compare notes, to make sure we remembered the same sequence of events. We did. The missing food. The mute girl who spoke. The voices calling a child's name. The door that locked itself. The lights on the ridge. There were no contradictions between our memories. No inflation. No drift. That bothered us more than disagreement would have. People often imagine encounters like this as chaotic, violent, or cinematic. This one wasn't. It followed an internal logic. Every incident escalated slightly, just enough to redirect behavior. Nothing crossed a line that would force confrontation. We were warned. We tested the warning. We were corrected. Then we left. I later spoke to someone who studies environmental psychology, how isolation, unfamiliar terrain, and stress can distort perception. He listened patiently, nodded at the right moments, and offered explanations that were technically plausible. But even he paused when I mentioned the specificity. Hallucinations don't coordinate across people. They don't obey spatial rules. They don't wait for doors to be unlocked. And folklore, real folklore, doesn't need belief to function. It predates belief. It survives by observation. That's the part most modern discussions miss. You don't have to believe in something for it to affect you. Gravity doesn't care about belief. Neither does fire. Neither, perhaps, do certain places. The caretaker understood that. He didn't frame the forest as evil or sacred. He didn't warn us away from it permanently. He simply described how to behave within it, the same way someone might explain currents in a river. Don't swim there at night. Don't go in alone. Don't follow voices. Simple rules. We broke the unspoken one: curiosity. Not curiosity in general, that's human, but the kind that insists on proximity. We wanted to see the tower. We wanted confirmation. We wanted to look directly at what had already told us it preferred not to be looked at. The lights appeared after that, not before. That timing matters. Whatever those lights were, people, animals, atmospheric phenomena, something else entirely, they appeared only once we had crossed the threshold. Only once we had climbed, observed, and asked. After that, the situation resolved quickly. One final message. One locked door. Enough to remove any remaining doubt. Then silence. Years have passed now. The lodge still exists. The forest still stands. The tower still watches the slope. Other people stay there, pass through, hike nearby. Most experience nothing at all. That also matters. It suggests this wasn't a curse or a trap or a site of constant disturbance. It was conditional, contextual, responsive, like many things in nature. The story doesn't ask you to believe in jinn, spirits, or any particular explanation. Those are cultural lenses, ways of interpreting something that resists easy classification. What the story does ask is simpler. It asks you to consider that not all intelligence announces itself. Not all presence wants acknowledgement. And not all silence is absence. Sometimes a place notices you noticing it, and sometimes the correct response is not fear, not denial, but departure. We left. That was enough. And the forest let us go.